This is the story of Mr. R.K. Baliga, the founder of the electronic city in Bangalore, India, leading to this region, earning the sobriquet Silicon Valley of India. He was a high energy, ecumenical, entrepreneurial, government bureaucrat, an educator, a polymath who worked relentlessly to make this world a better place. He was a transformational figure whose dream changed the economy of Bangalore or Bengaluru, that of the state of Karnataka, that of India, and consequently the world. This is the story of Mr. R.K. Baliga, who established the Silicon route from the Bay Area to Bengaluru or Bangalore, and from Bangalore back to the Bay Area. He was born in Bangalore on the Konkan coast, the west coast of India, on 29 December 1929, which was then in Madras Presidency of British India. The black and white figure shows Bangalore on the west coast, and Madras was on the east coast, and it surrounded the old state of Mysore. The color photograph shows now that Bangalore is in the state of Karnataka. The state of Mysore was redistricted to include the parts of the Madras Presidency and is now called the state of Karnataka. Bangalore was in the South Kannada district, now known as Dakshin Kannada district, along the west coast, and this is a map of the South Kannada district. He was born as Bantwal Ramakrishna Baliga on December 29, 1929. The photograph on his left is when you're a young boy. You'll notice he has earrings, which was traditional for people of his community. His parents were Sri Bantwal Vaikunta Baliga and Mrs. Sharada Baliga on the photograph, the color photograph on the right. The Baligas were, by background, from a clan of entrepreneurs, the Gaud Saraswat Brahmins, who arrived to the Konkan coast in the 1890s. They're originally Saraswat Brahmins, Kashmiri Brahmins from the Saraswati River in Kashmir. When the river dried up, they all moved down south along the west coast of the Konkan coast. They're Konkani speaking. According to the Norwegian writer Harald Tams Lichy, he wrote a book called Business Brahmins, subtitled The Gaud Saraswat Brahmins of South Kannada. This clan of entrepreneurs were instrumental in creating a flourishing Konkan coast, and their businesses still form the core of the local economy where they settled in. In a foreword of a book of Who's Who of Gaud Saraswat Brahmins, his father, B. Vaikunta Baliga, was a speaker of the state of Mysore, then known as the state of Mysore, says about Gaud Saraswat Brahmins is that they are hardworking people and they comprise persons from several walks of life. One pleasant feature of the Gaud Saraswat Brahmins is their desire to mingle with the people of the locality where they settle down and identify themselves completely with the hopes and aspirations and the culture of the people of the locale where they settle down in. He goes on to say, as a result, they've become absorbed with the cultures of various localities in Goa, Kerala, Mysore, and Maharashtra. He says they are devoted patriots for the service of the country and have also played an equally important parts in all fields of activity, including industry, parliamentary activities, government service, etc. In fact, the South Kannada district or the Dakshin Kannada district has been said to be the cradle of banking in India. 7 of country's leading banks, Canara Bank, Syndicate Bank, Corporation Bank, Vijaya Bank, Karnataka Bank, Vaishya Bank and State Bank of Mysore originated from the state. Of these, the first 5 were started in these coastal districts. Between 1880 and 1935, as many as 22 banks were established in coastal Karnataka, 9 of which were in the regional commercial hub of Bangalore. Many of these were started by Gaud Saraswat Brahmins who were interrelated. Mr. R.K. Baliga's father, Sri Vaikunta Baliga, was a social activist, a freedom fighter, a lawyer, a member of the Legislative Assembly of Tamil Nadu initially because Bangalore was in Madras Presidency, and later an MLA of the Mysore state. He served as a law and labor minister of the state, and later on a speaker of the Legislative Assembly. Mr. Vaikunta Baliga was a freedom fighter. He relinquished his membership of the Madras Provincial Assembly according to the Karnataka State Gazette in 1973. He was also known to follow Mahatma Gandhi's call in 1934 to support the freedom movement, and he was among one of the few who took a leading part in the movement. In fact, he embraced the Gandhian living of being frugal. Throughout his life, he wore the Gandhi Khadi jacket and the Gandhi cap and lived a very frugal life. He was more about doing the public good and leaving this place a better planet. Mr. Vaikunta Baliga was an active social worker, says one of his biographies written by Mr. M.N. Prabhu. He rendered valuable service as the director and later chairman of the Canara Banking Corporation, which is now well known as Corporation Bank, from 1932 to 1957. And the bank was started by Haji Abdullah. He also served as a lawyer to the Bishop of Bangalore. In addition, Mr. Vaikunta Baliga served as the director and chairman of Canara Public Conveyance, which is a leading automobile company started by entrepreneur Mr. V.S. Kudva, who was also the founder of Syndicate Bank. Mr. Vaikunta Baliga also served as the chairman of Canara Mutual Assurance Company, which is an insurance company till it was nationalized. He also served as the president of the Academy of General Education, which was started by Dr. Sri T.M.A. Pai, which is responsible for colleges in Manipal and Udupi in the South Kannada or Dakshin Kannada district. In a book on the story of Indian life insurance by the Life Insurance Corporation of India, it says the Canara Mutual Assurance Company was a venture of Dr. Sri T.M.A. Pai, who founded the many institutions including educational, medical and industrial field in Udupi and Manipal, and Sri B. Vaikunta Baliga was a director of this company. Bombay Life is an insurance company which was based out of Bombay. The company secured the services of Mr. Kochikar Padmanabh Pai of Kochikar Brothers as their chief agents for Madras Presidency. The support of the Kochikar Padmanabh Pai was critical because it proved of great assistance in strengthening the position of Bombay Life Insurance Company. Sri Kochikar Padmanabh Pai's brother's daughter will go on to marry Sri R.K. Baliga many years later. The Canara Banking Corporation was started by Haji Abdullah, and you will see, according to records, the management or the directors of Canara Banking Corporation, which later becomes Corporation Bank, include Kochikar Padmanabh Pai and Sri B. Vainkunta Baliga. Canara Bank is started by Mr. Amambal Subbarao Pai, and his son is a lawyer, and Mr. B. Vainkunta Baliga does his clerkship under his son after he finishes law school. And many decades later, Amambal Subbarao Pai's great-grandson marries Mr. R.K. Baliga's daughter. On the right side are the founders of Canara Industrial and Banking Syndicate, and the founders include Upendra Anand Pai, Dr. T.M.A. Pai and Sri V.S. Kudva. Sri Upendra Anand Pai's son, T. Ramesh U. Pai, marries Dr. Vainkunta Baliga's daughter, that is Mr. R.K. Baliga's sister. And as you already know, that Mr. Vainkunta Baliga serves on Canara Public Conveyance Company, which is started by Mr. V.S. Kudva. He also serves, Mr. Vainkunta Baliga serves as the president of the Academy of General Education, which is started by Dr. T.M.A. Pai. In a biography of Mr. V.S. Kudva, who is a Dion and icon of automobile industry, Mr. Vainkunta Baliga is listed as one of his close friends, and Mr. Vainkunta Baliga served as the director of his company, and so was Dr. T.M.A. Pai. Another good friend of Sri Vainkunta Baliga was Ullal Srinivas Mallya, Member of Parliament, who was reputed to be the maker of modern Mangalore or Bengaluru. This is a photograph of the Kochikar brothers, the chief agents of the Bombay Life Insurance Company in Madras Presidency at Udupi. This is a photograph showing that they distributed clothing and food to local Harijans in Bombay. As you will know, that the leader of the Kochikar brothers, Kochikar Padmanabh Pai, his brother's daughter will marry Mr. R.K. Baliga. Background is Mr. Vainkunta Baliga, father of Mr. R.K. Baliga, was excommunicated by the Konkani Swamijis for eating with the food with the Harijans. In the course of the first convocation address of Kasturba Medical College, Sri B. Vainkunta Baliga, who was the president of the Academy of General Education, went on to say that great things have all come from small and humble beginnings. Sri Vainkunta Baliga was born on 10th April 1895 in Bantwal, 16 miles from Bangalore, headquarters of South Canara district. So goes the name B. Vainkunta Baliga or Bantwal Vainkunta Baliga. After receiving early education at Bangalore, at St. Aloysius College, he went to Madras or Chennai to study at Pachiyappa College to do his Bachelor in Arts, passed first from the college and the university examination, securing McDonald Gold Medal for the year 1916 to 17. He studied law in the Law College of Madras and set up practice in Bangalore. Mr. Vainkunta Baliga then joined the Canara Banking Corporation as a director around 1926 and continued till 1957. That this Canara Banking Corporation later became Corporation Bank. He resigned from the directorship consequent to acceptance of a seat in the Mysore government cabinet. He also served as the director and chairman of the board of directors of Canara Public Conveyance Company Limited. He served as the chairman of the board of directors of the Canara Mutual Assurance Company till it was nationalized. He served as the president of the Academy of General Education in Manipal which established Manipal High School, the first grade college, styled Mahatma Gandhi Memorial College, and a law college at Udupi, and the Kasturba Medical College at Manipal, and Bangalore, and an engineering college in Manipal. Mr. Vaikunta Baliga was an honorary life member of Canara Chamber of Commerce for services rendered in establishing the Canara Chamber of Commerce and the president of the chamber for 1 year. He was a member of the Council of Management of the Canara High School and Associate Group of Institutions. He was the vice president and later on the president of Ishwar Ananda Mahila Shevashram in Bangalore. He also served as the chairman of the board of directors of General Investment Trust Limited, and he was the president of the Deen Bandhu Seva Sangha in Bangalore. He was a member of the district board and the leader of the Congress Party in 1942, and he resigned his membership and came out of the Parishad. He inaugurated the Gaudsarasat Brahmin Parishad in Bombay. He was elected a member of the Madras Legislative Assembly from Mangaluru constituency in 1952. He was a member of many committees appointed by the Madras government. He was a member of the Hospital Advisory Committee in Bangalore. He is a member of the Development Board of South Canara, and he was elected to the Mysore Legislative Assembly from the Bangalore constituency, and he served initially as a Minister of Labour, Legal Affairs, and later on as Speaker of Mysore. The town of Bantwal is east of Bangalore. One important part, it had a devastating flood in 1923, and Sri Vaikunta Baliga saw his father lose a lot of his savings, and this helped develop resilience in his future endeavors. This is these three photographs at the top. This is Sri Vaikunta Baliga with President Radhakrishnan of India and Maharaja Krishnaraj Wadeyar. The middle photograph shows him with Jawaharlal Nehru, Prime Minister, Sri B.D. Jetty, CM, Chief Minister of Mysore, and Mr. Malaradaya, a leader of and a member of the Legislative Council of Mysore. And the photograph on the right shows him along with Mrs. Indira Gandhi, who was the Prime Minister of India. And the bottom photograph shows that the law college in Udupi is named the Vaikunta Baliga College of Law. Sri Vaikunta Baliga, in his Independence Day address to the Indian Institute of World Culture, talks about Gandhiji, and since he was a Gandhian, and he goes on to say, for Gandhiji, religion was basic, but his religion was nothing narrow or exclusive. He used the word religion in a broad sense of self-realization based on conviction that morality is the basis of things and truth the substance of morality. Sri Baliga cited concepts from other faiths, and he said, from the great teachings that have come down to us from saints and sages, cannot we understand that divinity is still in all of us, and that we can make the world a beautiful place. So Mr. R.K. Baliga grew up in a family which believed in the public good rather than the personal good. His story is about making this world a better place, how a government bureaucrat, without enriching himself, without being a billionaire, could make a difference and change the economy of Bangalore, Karnataka, and India, and probably the world. This photograph is with his siblings and their spouses. He had 8 siblings, so very early in life he learnt to be respectful to a variety of opinions which were different from his. The philosophy of Sri R.K. Baliga, founder of the Electronic City, is about doing the public good rather than enrich himself, like his father, and not dissimilar to Prime Minister Modi, who does not personally enrich himself or his family. Sri R.K. Baliga went to Canara High School, which is across the street from where his parents lived. And the Canara High School is an educational institution which was founded by Amambal Subrapai, who was also the founder of the Canara Bank. After finishing high school, he went to St. Aloysius College for his 11th and 12th, which is known in India as Intermediate University course, or now known as Pre-University course. And this is where he developed a very ecumenical approach to life. After completing his 11th and 12th, he did a Bachelor of Electrical Engineering at Annamalai University and completed in 1951. He was one among 4 honor students, and this university is in Madras or Chennai. It was typical of people from Bangalore in those days to go to Madras or Chennai because it was the capital of the Madras Presidency. After he completed his electrical engineering, he went for his master's to the Indian Institute of Science, which he completed in 1953, and he held a Madras government merit scholarship. On the recommendation of the director of the Indian Institute of Science, he was selected by the International General Electric to work with General Electric for a period of 1 year in the US. The director at that time was Maneklal Sankalchand Thakur, or M.S. Thakur, who was an Indian power engineer and academic, and he later on went on to become the Director General of the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. Thakur was the professor of a new department of power engineering at the Indian Institute of Science. 2 years later, he assumed the directorship of the department, and he held that position until 1955. According to a Wikipedia page, he was elected as the head of the Freemasonry in India in January 1969 and continued until December 1974 after serving 2 consecutive terms of the most worshipful, the Grand Master of the Grand Lodge of India. Interestingly, after Mr. R.K. Baliga passed, a book was found in his belongings which showed that he was initiated into the lodge on 12 July 1958. He never spoke about it, so it's unclear whether he participated in the lodge or whether he just kept quiet. But it is possible that his old mentor, Mr. Thakur, may have initiated him to the lodge. Between 1948 and 1953, according to a resume of Mr. R.K. Baliga, he worked in a variety of jobs, including the Bangalore Electricity Supply Company, the Central Water and Power Commission in Delhi, the Delhi State Electricity Board, and then as a research scholar in the Indian Institute of Science. In early 1953, he went on to do his rotation at General Electric, and this is a record of the ship by which he went to US via London. The name of the ship was Multan, and he embarked in Mumbai or Bombay on his way to the US. At that time, a preliminary medical certificate describes him as 5 foot 9 inches, 142 pounds. Once he arrived in the US, as on the recommendation of the director of the Indian Institute of Science, he worked at General Electric for about 13 months. He worked at the Erie Works in Erie, Pennsylvania, in development engineering. He worked in the DeKalb Works in DeKalb, Illinois, in engineering, production, and quality control of motors. And finally, he worked in Schenectady Works, Schenectady, New York, where he worked as an erection engineer. He also did testing and setting of turbines, motors, and generators. He completed 13 months. 1 month extension was on a special request by one of the departments. He received very high recommendations during his year at General Electric. In fact, he was profiled in the General Electric News from DeKalb, Illinois, where he writes about India in an article, My Homeland India. He says, every sixth person in the world is from India, which has a population of 361 million, slightly more than double the population of the United States. It describes his biography until then. Says B.R. Baliga, he was known as Bantwal Ramakrishna Baliga, when he went to the US. And he was born in the city of Bangalore, which is located on the west coast of India. He goes on to say, Bangalore is one of the ports which exports cashew nuts, known as cashews in the US, black pepper, coffee, and forest products to Western countries, especially the United States. The article says B.R. Baliga had 11 years of schooling and 2 years of university study while living in the city of Bangalore. He later entered Annamalai University, a residential school which is located on the east coast of India. After 4 years of study in this university, he graduated with honours. Continuing his studies, he entered the Indian Institute of Science, which is in the city of Bangalore. Here at the Indian Institute of Science, he received his master's degree. He says that the city of Bangalore is about 3,000 feet above sea level and attracts several thousand visitors each year because of its nice weather. He talks about India and the number of religions. He says people practice the religion of their desire. Hinduism, which came to India more than 4,000 years ago. He says, in a sectarian sense, Hinduism is not a religion, but a philosophy or a way of life. Among other religions which prevail in India were Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, Islam, and Christianity. He says at that time, 35 million of the people, which is nearly 10% of the population, believe in Islam, and only 2% follow Christianity. He goes on to say, the prosperity of the people and the country's wealth in the past has lured many adventurers, traders, and explorers to India. During the past few centuries, the love of freedom has been cherished in the hearts of the people of India. He says the movement was intensified under the inspirational leadership of Mahatma Gandhi. He goes on to say the rapid development of the sources of power generation and the exploitation of natural resources of the country is gradually changing and bound to improve the economic and living conditions of the people. There were about 12 multi-purpose projects and more than 100 small projects that have been initiated by the government of India in recent years. And he goes on to say they're being executed so that they can be completed as soon as possible. And these projects will include flood control, bringing more areas under irrigation and farming, as well as power generation. He predicts that the power generation is bound to increase the utilization of abundant natural resources. 3/4 of the world's supply of sheet and black mica come from India, and much of it is exported to the United States. He goes on to talk about the rich heritage of paintings, sculpture, engravings and other arts. Incidentally, the famous gift sent by the people of India to Queen Victoria on the occasion of her ascending the throne was sari, which was made by a very fine material about 6 yards long. Interestingly, this gift was packed in a box about the size of a matchbox. He goes on to say, Taj Mahal was built of solid marble and it took 18 years to build. He says the climate of India is very disparate. One can find many unique scenes of interest and pleasure from the northern border with its snow-clad peaks to the southern border, which is demarked with the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean. He says one can travel from the coconut gardens of the west coast to the colorful and beautiful Vale of Kashmir. Variety is the key word to the tourists, with many scenes and points of everlasting interest. He goes on to say that he can assure anybody and everybody that if they go to India, that no tourist is disappointed because of the fact India can cater to the needs and whims of all tourists who come in search of something after their own heart. His prediction comes true many years later. According to the Washington Post, Steve Jobs told Mark Zuckerberg to visit a temple in India when Facebook was struggling. Mark Zuckerberg showed this story when he spoke in a town hall meeting with the Prime Minister in India. Zuckerberg mentioned that he was going through tough patches and visiting the temple in India helped him sort out his vision for the future of Facebook. Mr. R.K. Baliga was devout. He did perform a Graha Pravesha when he built his new house. And this is a photograph where he does the puja with the pujari. And also in the photograph are his cousin, his wife Shanti Baliga, his daughter who's now known as Latika Pai, and his mother, Misharada Baliga. This is a photograph where he performs the thread ceremony of his older son because he was devout. In this photograph, there are many prominent people who are leaders in the field, including his brother-in-law, Sri T. Rameshu Pai, who's one of the Manipal entrepreneurs. His siblings, Mr. Mohan Baliga, who was a senior banker at Corporation Bank. His older brother, B. Vishwanath Baliga, who is big in the life insurance company in Bangalore. His brother-in-law, K. Krishna Pai, was an entrepreneur. His other brother-in-law, Udupi Devdas Acharya, becomes the Auditor General of Karnataka. His cousin's husband, B.A. Malya, who helps his cousin, B. Vittal Malya, who started United Breweries. Also in the photograph are many of his nephews and nieces, including Dinesh and Harish Malya, or entrepreneurs. His nephews, Vasant Baliga, who is a doctor in the United States. Pangal Ramchandra Naik, who is a banker in New York City, his niece, Chitra Naik, who is an independent director of Infosys today, and many more people. And as you will see, he came of a family of entrepreneurs, educators, and people who believed in doing the public good. After completing 1 year General Electric, he then goes on to Westinghouse Electric International Company for a year. During that year, he gains experience in engineering, application, and in some cases sales. His experience includes experience in switchgear, large generators and rectifiers, motors and controls, air conditioning, panel board application, relay engineering, switchgear engineering, and distribution apparatus engineering. His reviews at Westinghouse Electric goes on to say that he showed a high degree of interest and a keen understanding of technical phases of work. Mr. Baliga is a very eager worker and has performed successfully in all the tasks we gave him. At Westinghouse Electric, he was the president of the international club at Westinghouse Electric Corporation, where there were more than 10 different nationalities which were brought together, and it promoted international goodwill among them and Americans. In an article profiling him many years later in the Westinghouse International Graduate and Student Communicator, a key message Mr. R.K. Baliga has, as an Indian engineer must be versed in social sciences. He says the role of a young Indian engineer is predicated upon the technological advances that have been made in the last decade. Such a person must be completely up to date in his field or her field. Nevertheless, pure knowledge is not the complete panacea. In practical terms, any engineer must apply his know-how with an eye to the social, economic, geographic, educational, and natural resource limitations of one's country. He goes on to say, in a developing land, one must be willing to work long hours, and in addition, the ingenuity will be tested constantly in the use of indigenous products. Parts cannot always be purchased abroad due to generally acute shortage of foreign exchange in India. He says the engineer has to produce results with available resources despite the fact there exists an inequality of conditions. So a key takeaway that an engineer must be well versed in social science. He then goes on to gain experience at Kaiser Engineering Overseas Corporation, which is based in Jamshedpur. Before he goes back to Jamshedpur, he works at Kaiser Engineering in Oakland, California, and he is well known to drive from coast to coast in his car. In a letter of recommendation to Kaiser Engineers, in an inter-office memorandum, his boss, Mr. Bookman, says, Mr. Baliga arrived on this project as a designer. After observing for 5 months, I requested that he be transferred to the field to head up our field office. Mr. Baliga was vested with the responsibility of checking and approving bills of material, requisitioning materials, supplies, checking and distribution. He has maintained a constant vigil on all areas and has avoided many mix-ups. He then goes on to say, he spent 2 months as a designer in Kaiser's Oakland office before returning to India. So Mr. R.K. Baliga worked in the Bay Area, in the Silicon Valley of US before he came back to India. While he worked at Oakland, Hewlett-Packard had already been started in 1939, and now we know Silicon Valley includes Facebook or Meta, Amazon, Apple, Google, Twitter, Microsoft, Tesla, to mention a few. But clearly, having lived in the Bay Area in the 1950s, he was aware about the promise of electronics. This is one of the photographs before he left the US to come back to India. He embarked at New York in the SS Queen Elizabeth, as the ship's records say, and then from New York they sailed to Southampton. Then a few days later, he embarked on the ship Corfu to go back to Mumbai or Bombay. As you will see, the whole journey in those days from India to the US took at least 3 weeks. A copy of his CV from 1960 clearly shows that he worked in Oakland, California in 1956. This would have clearly opened his eyes to the Bay Area and the promise of electronics, which would be critical later on. In another very confidential memorandum, his boss goes on to say, Mr. Baliga has justified a very high recommendation of General Electric Company and Westinghouse Electric Corporation by his work in our organization. And he goes on to say he's an indispensable engineer. In the Westinghouse Graduate Communicator, he says, after spending 1 year as a Westinghouse student, I returned to India in 1956 with an assignment from Messrs. Kaiser Engineers, Consulting Engineers, to Tata Iron and Steel, Jamshedpur, for expansion of their production capacity from 1 million tons to 2 million tons per annum. The project then costed $160 million and had to be completed within a period of 33 months. For 3 years, I worked at Kaiser Engineers and their associates. I was initially involved in design and drawing division. I was also responsible for planning, material control and coordination until such time as the equipment arrived on site. Once it was installed, I worked on commissioning and handing over the various equipment. He goes on to say, upon completion of the program, he moved to a subsidiary of Union Carbide, the National Carbide Company Limited in Calcutta. His next job involved, he was an educator at the Manipal Institute of Technology, where he was professor and vice principal. He was also the founding head of Department of Electrical Engineering at Manipal Institute of Technology. Many decades later, a graduate of that department which he founded, Satya Nadella, will go on to be the CEO of Microsoft Corporation along the west coast of the US. This is a photograph of Mr. R.K. Baliga with Dr. T.M.A. Pai. Dr. T.M.A. Pai was the founder of modern-day Manipal, and Mr. R.K. Baliga is the founder of the Electronic City or Electronic Cities in Bangalore, both visionaries. Mr. Baliga, therefore, was constantly interacting with the Manipal entrepreneurs, including T. Rameshu Pai, who was his sister's husband, and naturally he learnt the challenges entrepreneurs have in the Fabian India when it was highly regulated. And Mr. Rameshu Pai was not only one of the prominent Manipal entrepreneurs, he also um, was in the banking system, which initially financed Mr. Dhirubhai Ambani. And Mr. Ramesh Pai served on the board of Reliance India till the day he passed. And you can see that Mr. Baliga, R.K. Baliga, had insights into how industries had to perform under very regulated system of India of those days. In 1959, he would get married to Chitra Pai, who is now known as Shanti Baliga, and she would be very key in his success because she would be an entrepreneur. She grew up in Mumbai. She's a social worker. She studied at St. Xavier's, Mumbai, and did a master's in social work, which was unusual for a woman to have a master's degree in those days. And she played ping pong for Maharashtra in her younger days. Mr. R.K. Baliga's father-in-law was an engineer and head of the railway workshop, the Central Railway Workshop in Matunga, Mumbai. Mr. R.K. Baliga traveled widely, and this is in Egypt with his bride and wife, Shanti Baliga. Shanti Baliga was known as Chitra Pai before she got married. She completed her BA at St. Xavier's, Mumbai, and then went on to complete her MA in Sociology from the School of Economics and Sociology, subsequently merged with the University of Mumbai. She also did a postgraduate diploma in marketing and advertising from Bharat Vidya Bhavan in Bangalore, where she received the Vijaya Bank Award for Best All-Round Student in Marketing and Advertising. She was an avid educator. She taught conversational English as a lecturer at the Bharat Vidya Bhavan. She is known in Bangalore for doing volunteer work. She served as the secretary of the National Council of Women, Bangalore branch, University Women's Association, Bangalore branch, and she was chairman for fundraising. She was also the founder of the Guild of Service Bangalore branch and president. She helped drafting a statement on building a civil society, a guide to action. She was one of the co-authors. She was the founder president of an organization which mobilized women to do volunteer work in rural areas. She adopted villages including Abigere, Sulikere near Kingeri, Margadonahalli and Varadhalli in Magdi Taluk. The organization was responsible for starting balwadis, that is nurseries for children, vocational training centers, nutrition programs, adult literacy classes for women, income generating programs for women, establishing scholarships for education for women, establishing a health fund, a midday meal scheme for street children, special coaching classes for 10th grade students and 10th standard students, and a nursery for children of low income groups. She's also active now in the Rotary Club as chairman for community projects. She's also active in the Inner Wheel Club, participated in blood donation camps, health checkup camps. She was also very active in the Family Planning Association of India, Bangalore branch. She represented India at international workshops in Indonesia, Beijing, Lucknow, and Chennai. Shanti Baliga received several awards, including from the Lioness Club of Bangalore, from the Indian Development Education Foundation, the Bolar Education and Trust, from the Gaut-Saraswat Mahila Vrinda and the Gaut-Saraswat Sevak Samaj for her multifaceted voluntary work. She also represented India, the United Nations meeting in Beijing, China, which was inaugurated by Hillary Clinton. Her brother, K. Krishna, and Purnima Pai were entrepreneurs, and this was very helpful for Mr. R.K. Baliga to have a knowledge of the challenges of entrepreneurs when he went on to start the electronic city and visualize it. In 1961, he went to Paris as the president of the Karnataka Productivity Council, and he was the deputy leader of the team for management training. He obtained a diploma in management. So you could see he was both an educator and he was avidly trying to learn all the time and broaden his education and footprint. The next institution he moves is Bharat Electronics in Bangalore, where he serves as the chief engineer from 1961 to 1968, a works manager from 1968 to 73, deputy general manager of the radar division 1973 to 76, and then he comes back to BEL many years later in 1983 for about a few months. But when he was chief engineer of BEL, he was in charge of all planning, design, drawing, plant layout, installation and maintenance of plant and machinery in the factory, as well as new projects. One important role he had was development of a township. Between 1961 and 1968, he lives with his father, and so he has access to a lot of politicians of that time. As you all are aware, in those days, people went into politics to give back to society and in fact lost money doing so. And living with his father, Mr. R.K. Baliga, developed this deep sense of leaving this planet a better place. And his father died in 1968. While he was at BEL, he followed the same spirit of giving back and serving the public good. He developed a residential colony for the company, which consisted of more than 1,400 houses, including places of worship of different religions. He also volunteered to be the president of the BEL Cooperative Housing Society, and he developed another housing colony of 1,500 houses. This experience is going to be critical for him to envision the electronic city in Bangalore. He had a pulse of the people. He was also the president of the BL Fine Arts Club, which organized music festivals, drama festivals, and which involved covering 10 different languages and working with individuals from many backgrounds. And this really broadened his perspective. In addition, when he was at BEL, he was sent to Japan for 4 months. At that time, Japan was in its heyday in the electronics world, and so he developed a perspective of the Japanese way of manufacturing and entrepreneurship. While he was at BEL, his wife Shanti Baliga starts a company which manufactures ovens and other machineries. Her trials and tribulations of running a profitable company gives them a lot of insights on the challenges of entrepreneurship in India of that time. He would use these insights to make the job and the lives of entrepreneurs to Electronic City easier, given all the regulation of India of that time. And this is going to be another critical component in why Electronic City is successful many years later. He was also an educator. He was a member of the Board of Studies and faculty and examiner for the MBA program of Bangalore University. So he was constantly educating and learning. He also taught at the National Productivity Council, the Indian Management Associations, and many other professional bodies. So he was not only a practical person, he was up to date with knowledge, being an educator. He served as the national president of the Indian Institute of Plant Engineers, bringing more than 4,000 engineers from all parts of India, and he lectured extensively at these meetings. At that meeting, there were two chief guests, and you'll see in the left photograph. One is Mr. T.A. Pai, was the Union Industries Minister. And as I said earlier, Mr. T.A. Pai was the brother of his brother-in-law, Ramesh U. Pai. And Mr. T.A. Pai was a member of parliament from South Canara or Dakshin Kannada. But more importantly, he meets Sri Veerap Moily, who is the industry minister in Karnataka. And Sri Veerap Moily, or Mr. Veerap Moily, is a member of the Legislative Assembly from South Canara. So you will see Mr. R.K. Baliga had a range of experience in India, in the US, in France, in Japan, and he was an avid learner, an educator, and he was always volunteering to do the public good. He came from a clan of entrepreneurs, and all this experience would be critical in developing and envisioning the electronic city and cities in India. His experiences in the US, in the Bay Area, France, Japan, and India prepared him to envision the development of the electronic city. He used his experiences from his side hustles to provide a great vision for the state of Karnataka and consequently India. R.K. Baliga was an active member of the Rotary Club of Bangalore. Many years later, he goes on to be the president of the Rotary Club. But a key member of the Rotary Club he meets there is G.V.K. Rao, who is the Chief Secretary of Karnataka. He is the chief bureaucrat of the state of Karnataka. It is there Mr. Baliga shares his vision for the electronic city with Mr. G.V.K. Rao. Mr. G.V.K. Rao encourages him to put a white paper, and it is this white paper which Mr. G.V.K. Rao shares with Mr. Devraj Ars, the Chief Minister of Karnataka at that time, and gets the process rolling regarding the project of the electronic city and the development of electronics for the state of Karnataka. This is a letter from the Office of the Chief Secretary organizing a meeting because a visiting entrepreneur, Julian Olive Conway, president of the Conway Electronics Limited from Toronto, was in Bangalore to discuss possible collaboration and to manufacture electronic units in the state. If you will see, at that time, in mid-1976, Mr. Baliga was still the Deputy General Manager for the Radar Division at the Bharat Electronics Limited, and the Chief Secretary invited him to the meeting Many months later, or in July, Mr. Baliga takes over as the chairman and managing director of the Karnataka State Electronics Development Corporation, or Keonics. This is a photograph of Mr. R.K. Baliga with Mr. Devrajers, the Chief Minister of Karnataka, where they announce the Karnataka State Electronics Development Corporation, or Keonics, which is going to change the landscape of the state. Mr. Baliga was visionary in that he thought about clusters. It was unique. Now we have several books on clusters. There is a book on the culture and competition in Silicon Valley and Route 128, written by Professor Saxenian from Harvard, called Regional Advantage. There is a book called The New Geography of Jobs by Professor Enrico Moretti from Berkeley. And then there is a book on building high-tech clusters, Silicon Valley and Beyond, edited by Timothy Bresnahan and Alfonso Gambardella. And R.K. Baliga was able to envision the advantage of clusters way back in 1976. There are several other clusters. There is Hollywood, where all the movie business is together. There's the wine country in the Bay Area. There's Bollywood in Mumbai. And these are examples of clusters. The other very important concept which Mr. Baliga was able to foresee, was the advantage of the government or the state to encourage entrepreneurship. And this is written elegantly by London School of Economics professor Mariana Mazzucato in a book titled The Entrepreneurial State. It was the Financial Times Best Book of the Year when it was published. And it kind of debunks the myth that it is private versus public sector myths. It's really collaborative work between the state and entrepreneurs. And Mr. Baliga was able to see the role that the state can do to encourage entrepreneurship. The Indian Institute of Management Ahmedabad professor Rakesh Basant has written a similar book called The Black Box regarding the innovation and the public policy of India regarding entrepreneurship. The word Silicon Valley, USA was first championed by Don Heffler, who was a correspondent for the Electronic News, in January of 1970 to describe the Bay Area, and that sobriquet has stuck for the Bay Area. Mr. R.K. Baliga is the first chairman and managing director or CEO of Keonics, that is the Karnataka State Electronics Development Corporation, even designed the logo for the company. In Data India, which is a publication of the Press Institute of India in 1977, it talks about Keonics. In fact, the very first sentence is, this is in 1977, Keonics foresees electronics decade. The newly started Karnataka State Electronics Development Corporation foresees an electronic decade in the state. Times of India reported it on March 19. It was started with an authorized capital of 10 million rupees, aimed at making Karnataka the electronic state of the country. At that time, they estimated that in the next decade, that is up to 87, 100 electronic units with an annual production of 20,000 million rupees will come up in the state. At that time, Karnataka was already accounting for about a third of the country's total electronics production and 90% of the professional electronics equipment manufactured in the country. And it goes on to say that Keonics aimed at providing prospective entrepreneurs with assistance to set up electronic units. So the government was not going to be manufacturing, and this is going to be a key reason this approach worked, because in other states which had similar electronics development corporation, the government decided to manufacture it themselves, while here the Keonics decided to provide assistance to prospective entrepreneurs. And in addition, it realized that it is important to make the process smooth, and his entrepreneurial background, he devised a one-stop shopping for prospective entrepreneurs. So his experience as an entrepreneur, coming from a clan of entrepreneurs, he was aware some of the hurdles entrepreneurs had, and he was able to smoothen it out compared to the other states of India. In Commerce America, in March of 1977, soon after it was incorporated, Keonics goes on to say its interests include communication equipment, including TV equipment, teleprinters, radar equipment, medical instruments, computers, process control instruments, aviation and space technology instruments, electrical units and assemblies, and electronic components. So the key goal was to promote the growth of electronics across the board in the state of Karnataka. Given his philosophy of an engineer with a social conscience, when the Keonics credo is developed while it's established, it goes on to say, while Keonics extends its assistance to all electronics units in the state, in the public, in the private or joint sectors, it is aware of its responsibility to the community to hold the price line while ensuring the quality of the products and services it promotes. Its brochure at that time talks about how it will help prospective entrepreneurs to locate units, and it already talked about 18 projects involving an investment of over 40 crores were under consideration, and some of them had already been issued licenses. Keonics also wanted to help entrepreneurs and set up a center for material needs, because small and medium scale entrepreneurs may find it difficult to obtain components, indigenous or foreign, and one of the roles Keonics had is to develop a material center to source components for the electronic industry. It also strived to provide testing to international standards and locating markets both at home and abroad. His vision went beyond the electronic city in Bangalore. At that time, in 1976-77, he had already envisioned 20 townships for the state of Karnataka, from the north Bidar to the south in Mysore. And the goal was to develop technopreneurs, which he called, to man electronic units that will be set up in these areas. In addition, the brochure he talked about programs being implemented to create interest in electronics among school and college students and science teachers. A 1980 annual report showpieced medical equipment or used by dental professionals or dentists, called interferotic cum neuroexciters, which was developed by Keonics. Keonics also developed, manufactured and installed the air traffic control desk at the HAL airport, which is the main airport in Bangalore at that. He was constantly hustling, attending trade shows. This is a trade show where he is on the right side is one of the board of directors, Mr. N.K. Prabhakar Rao, who is the director of Keonics and a very senior IAS officer. And you could see he was always hustling to grow electronics in the state of Karnataka. In 1980, an annual report to the shareholders, which is the state of Karnataka, the report says there has been a manifold increase in the activities of Keonics during the year under consideration. They developed a Keonics project center for antennas and electronic switch boxes for the post telegraphs department. There was a testing and development center for rendering effective services to small scale industries. There was a research and development center, and it is that center which developed the air traffic control desk for the HAL airport. It had a commercial center to serve small scale industry to help them set up a sales network. The report goes on to talk about its services to other public sector undertakings, including the Mysore Power Corporation and the Mahatma Gandhi hydroelectric station. It talks about new projects, including the connector project, the high voltage resistors, the television receiver manufacturing project, and it talks about service to non-resident technocrats or non-resident Indians, and it talks about electronic city. And at that time, it says considerable planning has been done and civil works have already been commenced. As desired by the government of Karnataka, they propose to complete the project within 3 years as against the original proposal of 5 years. And as you can see, it's already on the fast track what he had started. This is a copy of the project profile of Electronic City, which was placed at the 13th meeting of the Board of Directors in 1979. As you'll see from Google Maps, Electronic City is in the southeast part of Bangalore at that time. The report starts by saying that the government of Karnataka has realized the importance of electronics and says it has been promoting electronic industries for the last 3 decades. The first industry that was set up was radio and electrical manufacturing in the year 1947, that is when India got its independence. Thereafter, in view of special infrastructural and other facilities available, the central government established Indian Telephone Industries in 1950, Bharat Electronics in 1954, and apart from these production units, there has also been an excellent infrastructure for training of manpower in the field of electronics. The Indian Institute of Science is one such institution where Mr. Baliga graduated from. It was established by J.R.D. Tata and Maharaja Krishnaraj Wadeyar with a little nudge from Swami Vivekananda. And this report says the Indian Institute of Science has been the main source of top electronic engineers for the last 4 decades all over the country and abroad. In addition, there are a number of institutions like research organizations like Electronic and Radar Development Establishment, the Indian Space Research Organization, Controllerate of Inspection of Electronics, NAL or National Aeronautical Laboratory, all have fostered the development of electronics, he says. However, in order to continue to play its part, the state government was the first to conceive a functional electronic estate in Peenya, which is the largest in South Asia and is going to house 800 industries. In the year 1971, the state government constituted an expert committee to make recommendations for promoting small-scale electronic industries, which after due deliberations made a case that Karnataka is an ideal state and has got all the infrastructure ideally suited for developing electronic industries. In 1976, the government established Keonics exclusively to plan, organize, and promote rapid growth of electronics, and was entrusted with the task of formulating policies and programs and implementing steps to maintain leadership of Karnataka in the field of electronics. The project report talked about developing areas in where now the electronic city is, in Konapanna Agrahara, the rural area in Bangalore city, in Mysore in the south, Hubli, Malnad area, which is Hassan and Tirthali, Raichur and Gulbarga in the north, and Belgaum also in the north. He goes on to say there are several other areas and every district is a potential source. However, it is important to be realistic and to move forward in a phased manner. His vision and the objectives for these areas include to create employment for educated men and women in different parts of the city, as electronics is a labor-intensive industry. Secondly, to commence production activities. He says the electronic industry needs minimum investment and can grow organically. It can be self-generating within a short period after commencement of commercial production. 3. To establish production activities with a rural bias, as projects can be implemented in rural areas without the need of large investment. So he was thinking of jobs for people living in the villages. 4. To develop available resources in backward areas, as electronics has got applications in every field, and in each district, he goes on to say, we could lay emphasis on infrastructural facilities available vis-a-vis the application that can be made. And 5. To give economic boost in different parts of the state as a multiplier of the economy of the area of technological development. The objectives of the electronic city, he says, is to develop the city with an integrated approach where there will be large, medium and small scale industries. He says it is different from other industrial areas or estates. As a matter of fact, it's a functional electronic area because experience has shown that an industrial estate will give fillip to small scale industries in certain aspects and have limitations from the point of view of making available the know-how on job inspection and quality assurance. And lastly, but importantly, marketing. He argues with an integrated approach, it is proposed to have a close liaison between large, medium and small scale industries so that the larger ones could place orders with the small scale, giving the necessary know-how or other facilities mentioned. With this, the small scale industrialist will be benefited of not having to look for the market all over the country, and the large scale industrialist will have the benefit of having their ancillaries or subcontracting agencies close at hand, as well as able to get jobs being farmed out at a much lower cost than producing themselves. His vision at that time, at the initial phase of the electronic city, was 10 large scale industries, 20 medium scale industries and 235 small-scale industries. Mr. Baliga had a passion for the electronic city and the growth of electronics in Karnataka. He had a big picture view because he was a consultant to the SCAP countries and unit of the United Nations between 1982 and 83 for electronics. An article in the newspaper The City Tab, 1981, there is his vision of electronics for the Karnataka state covered in this newspaper article. In 1983, Sunday, which is a national magazine, does a special survey on the world of microchips, and an article in this magazine talks about India's electronic city. More importantly, speaking of the future, he says, "I have a dream of establishing mini electronic cities in other parts of Karnataka like Mysore, but that will take a few more years to come about." He goes on to say, "Our aim is to create around 10,000 jobs in the electronic industry in the state." He says, "You see, we do not have an industrial culture like Japan or the USA. Whatever strides we have made is from 1956 onwards, when India started its industrialization. He continues to be very active, hustling for Keonics. This is a national meeting called Incomex in 1982. There are several dignitaries on the dais, but Mr. Veerap Moily, his mentor, who also hails from South Canara district, is there, and it is Mr. Veerap Moily's support which allowed Mr. Baliga to serve as the chairman and managing director of Keonics from 1976 to 1983. And he was aware of the Fabian economy. He put together a one-stop shopping, and this is going to make a major difference because in 1983 the government decides to relax licensing, and having the electronic city up and running puts it at an advantage compared to the rest of the country by over a decade. Mr. Veerap Moily served in the Karnataka cabinet from 1974 to 1982, but in 1983 the government changes, and then the next government comes, and Mr. Baliga's position of chairman and managing director is split into two positions, chairman and managing director. So there are two individuals who will be serving in this role, and his successors will continue to implement his vision in the decades to come. As you will see, he continues to hustle for Keonics or Karnataka State Electronics. He's at a meeting or a workshop for identifying occupational skill requirements of electronic industry in Bombay in 1982 or Mumbai. There are three other perspectives. One is Mr. Patankar, who is from Meltron, which is Maharashtra Electronics Development Corporation. And the other is Mr. Subramaniam from the Electronics Trade and Technology Development Corporation. You can see he's always hustling to promote electronics in Karnataka. An article in the Illustrated Weekly, a national magazine, talks about the relaxation of the licensing policy in 1983, which puts this concept of electronic city on the speed pathway. While serving as the chairman and managing director of Electronic City, he continues to participate in activities outside his work. He is the president of the Rotary Club of Bangalore between 1981 and 82. And as we discussed earlier, the Rotary will be one of the key drivers for making this project happen. He was invited at that time to be the chief guest at St. Joseph's Boys High School on Museum Road in Bangalore. Here, he and his wife, Mrs. Shanti Baliga, are on the dais, and the principal of the school, Father Hedwig de Costa, is speaking. Alumni of this high school moved from Bangalore to the Bay Area, while Mr. Baliga moved from Oakland to Bangalore. These gentlemen moved from Bangalore to the Bay Area. Dr. Joy Thomas was an entrepreneur and his company was bought by Google. Sabir Bhatia was founder of Hotmail. Ben Gomes was one of the first 8 employees of Google, and he fine-tuned Google Search, and he was a senior vice president of Google Search till about 2 years ago. Krishna Bharat was another alumnus of St. Joseph's Boys High School, who was one of the first 8 or 9 employees of Google, and he was the founder of Google News. George Kurian, who lives in the Bay Area, is CEO of NetApp. His twin brother Thomas Kurian is CEO of Google Cloud. And all these individuals went to St. Joseph's High School, Boys High School, a Jesuit school in Bangalore. So this is cross-pollination between the Bay Area and Bangalore to the Bay Area. Another prominent Bangalorean who lives in the Bay Area and went to Sapphire High School is Chitra Nayak. She is an independent board member of several companies, including Infosys, and so she's flying back and forth from the Bay Area to Bangalore for board meetings. Incidentally, she is the niece of Mr. R.K. Baliga. Mr. and Mrs. Baliga were always active in the community. Here he is with President Sanjeev Reddy, President of India, along with Mrs. Shanti Baliga. And on the photograph on the right, he is with President Zail Singh, who is also the President of India, at a trade meeting. Even as he was the chairman and managing director of Keonics, he was active in the Bangalore Management Association, and even after he completed his term at Keonics and he moved to Madras or Chennai, he was active in the Madras Management Association. He promoted modern management concepts. He was an educator and a learner, and he was a member of the Bangalore Industrial and Business Management Association. There are several articles regarding promoting private industry. This is an article by Dinsha Mistry, a professor at Stanford Law School, and it talks about the Indian state's role in creating a domestic software industry. It goes on to say, perhaps the most successful example is the Electronic City in Bangalore. In 1976, a state-level bureaucrat named R.K. Baliga incorporated Karnataka State Electronics Development Corporation. It would ultimately build an industrial park that provided an array of free and subsidized infrastructural benefits to the public and private electronic firms operating within its campus. The state government of Karnataka constructed office buildings, provided discounted and reliable 24-hour electricity, set up clean water systems, and in the late 1980s provided firms with access to internet and government-maintained satellite network. officials who oversaw Electronic City offered a single government window to make all requests, a one-stop shopping. A foreign software company could register itself with the state government in an afternoon. Otherwise, probably registering a business usually takes several months. Local government officials and even some customs officials would also be kept at bay. This state-level promotion is perhaps the main reason why 5 of the 10 largest software export firms are based in Bangalore and why so many international firms have been drawn to the city, says the article. With the new government in place in Karnataka, he rotates out of his position of Keonics and he goes back to BEL for a while. And he has no job for several months, which is not the highest time of his career. And this is where he is very resilient. And then he goes on to become the chairman and managing director of a public sector company called Hindustan Teleprinters in Chennai for 2 years, from February 1984 to February 1986. He's active there, and this is here he is with the Union Minister for the Department of Telecommunications, Sri Ramnivas Mirza, and the Secretary for the Department of Telecommunications, Mr. K. Thomas Kora. He continues to be active outside his job. He serves as the president of the All India Public Sector Sports Association and is responsible for organizing annual meets of 300 athletes and sportsmen and women from 40 different public sector industries from all over India. While he was in Madras, he was a chief guest at an evening at the Rotary Club of Chennai, and he talks about workaholism, which I guess nowadays we call burnout, and he talks about the subject of workaholism in your organization, and he talks about different types of workaholism and what can be done. And in fact, he concludes by suggesting 7 solutions to get one out of his rut. And he goes on to say, one of the solutions is to join the Rotary. Newspaper articles in the Hindu talk about his vision of growing the teleprinter industry in India and a 5-year plan for the thrust of telecom in India. So you could see that even though he moved from Bangalore to Chennai, he continued to be active in promoting electronics in the country. After he completed his term at Hindustan Teleprinters, for health reasons he moved back to Bangalore. More importantly, his wife and children were back in Bangalore, so he came back and he joined Sandur Prominent Fluid Controls, which was owned by Mr. M.Y. Garpade, a leading industrialist in Karnataka. Interestingly, way back then, in the mid-80s, they were involved in the transfer of technology on pollution control from West Germany to India. So he were aware about the importance of a clean environment. On an invitation from Dr. Sunita Simon Nee Kurpad from St. John's Medical College, he writes about the electronic city. You'll see in this article, he's listed as an industrial consultant to the state of Haryana. And this article is very interesting because this is in the mid-1980s, even before the software companies had gotten off the ground. He talks about the electronic city as a model which is to be adopted suitably for development of electronic industries in all parts of the state. And he goes on to say the priority drawn in the original action plan includes Bangalore district and in parentheses Silicon Valley of India. So the name Silicon Valley of India was promoted by him as early as mid-1980s even before modern day software companies now in the electronic city were there. He also talks about areas in Mysore, Hunsur area, Hubli, Dharwad area, Malnad area, which is Hassan and Shimoga, Raichur, Gulbarga, Belgaum, and Uttar Kannada areas. All these areas, he says, are ideally suited for electronic industries, and the implementation is not in the order mentioned above, but on the response for the entrepreneurs of the area. The second area now under active development is the industrial suburb of Mysore city. Some of the high-tech electronic industries he names include Kirloskar Electric, Larsen Toubros, etc. He also talks about training facilities. He talks about a materials bank. He goes on to say that the electronic city in Bangalore, the development is taking such rapid strides in the year 2000, he predicts that the industrial belt will stretch from Bangalore city to Hosur and will be buzzing with activity, providing employment for thousands, producing high-tech products worth billions of rupees. He goes on to say this is a model to be adopted for development of parts of the state. In 1998, he dies suddenly, probably due to hyperkalemia or high potassium because of chronic renal failure secondary to diabetes. He loved to cook, he was a foodie, and there were no statins or cholesterol pills available at that time. He developed diabetes at a young age. He died suddenly at the age of 58. In fact, he was dictating to his secretary when he died at a room at St. John's Medical College Hospital in the Koramangala area. The death was quick, so he didn't suffer, but he was young. There were obituaries in several papers. The Indian Express goes on to say, at that time, even before the software companies now in Electronic City, he says, if Bangalore today is looked upon as the Silicon Valley of India, with the number of electronic units coming up, both in the hardware and software sectors, one of the names which will be remembered for pioneering efforts is that of Mr. Ramakrishna Baliga. In fact, an article in the Illustrated Weekly at that time goes on to say, the electronic city has become a showpiece for Keonics. Administrators from various other states and even other countries continue to visit the park with the idea of learning how they can establish similar cities in their own domains. Another tipping point for the electronic city is in 1991 when the Narasimha Rao Manmohan Singh government liberalizes the economy, and this puts this project on steroids, so as to speak, on fast forward. There's an elegant article by Professor M.V. Rajiv Gowda, who is a professor at IIM Bangalore and later served as a member of parliament from Karnataka, and he talks about the liberalization and the bold gambit that paid off. In the 1990s, liberalization, the development of the internet, late 1990s, the Y2K, put the software industry on fast forward. Several tech entrepreneurs made it big, are billionaires, including Narayan Murthy, Nandan Nilekani, S. Gopalkrishnan, Shubulal, K. Dinesh, N.S. Raghavan and Ashok Arora, founders of Infosys. Asim Premji, another billionaire who started Wipro. Both of them, both Infosys and Wipro founders, moved from out of state to Bangalore because of the environment created for electronics which no other state had. And this is probably due to Mr. R.K. Baliga creating an environment for entrepreneurs and for electronics. The current Union Minister for Electronics, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, is another entrepreneur who worked in telecom, and again he did so in Bangalore. In fact, a recent article in the Deccan Herald in 2022 says there are several billionaires in Bangalore, and there are over 35 individuals whose net worth is more than 35 million United dollars in Bangalore. The next generation of entrepreneurs have continued to make India better. Nandan Nilekani, who is currently the chairman of Infosys, who was a brand ambassador for the Indian IT industry. He wrote books on imagining India, rebooting India. He was responsible for digitization and the Aadhaar card, which put India on fast forward. Another important player, according to the Times of India, is former GE chairman Jack Welch, who spoke to Sam Pitroda and Rajiv Gandhi at that time, who was the Prime Minister, and promoted outsourcing of electronics, and Bangalore benefited immensely from it. A decade later, after his passing, an article in the Deccan Herald talks about the brick and mortar story of Silicon City. It says it was R.K. Baliga who wrote the source code for the IT hub. Speaking to the Deccan Herald newspaper, Mr. Bandhu Sasalati, senior Keonics official who had known Baliga, said, "There is no doubt that Electronic City and IT revolution were the result of Baliga's foresight." He goes on to say, "It would have been very nice to recall the great man's contributions." Another official, Shiv Kumar Kardakal, in charge of infrastructure of Electronic City and IT parks, says Electronic City is the brainchild of Baliga. He was the first to envision the idea of Bangalore as India's Silicon Valley. Not many people took Baliga seriously when he expressed the idea of setting up an exclusive electronic industry. Thanks to Mr. G.V.K. Rao, the Chief Minister, Mr. Dev Rajars, responded positively and gave the idea a good start. Mr. Tim Campbell in Desi Blitz talks how Bengaluru became the Silicon Valley of India. And again, he talks about how Mr. R.K. Baliga made Bangalore the Silicon Valley of India. There are several industries now at Electronic City in Bangalore, including Infosys, Wipro, and in the greater Bangalore area. In fact, the establishment of Electronic City has created the Lollapalooza effect, as said by Charlie Munger, who is a partner of Warren Buffett at Berkshire Hathaway. It has been a multiplier. It's the rising tide has carried all boats. There are not only tech billionaires, but there are real estate billionaires like Jitu Birwani and Mr. Dayanand Pai and many others, the Prestige Group, and all have benefited from the growth of Bangalore. The Silicon route, now Air India or Tata Air India, has a non-stop from Bengaluru to the Bay Area. The positive Lollapalooza effect, Professor Rakesh Basant from IIM Ahmedabad talks about the Bangalore cluster, the evolution, the growth and challenges. A white paper by Professor Kelly Zai from Hong Kong talks about the growth and the vision which transformed Bangalore into India's Silicon Valley. In an article on locating Bengaluru as India's Silicon Valley, Professor Suparna Muzumdar-Kar talks about the vision of Bharat Ratna Moshagundam Vishweshwaraya, who was the Diwan of Mysore, was known as the father of the modern Mysore state. He was also a renowned engineer like Mr. Baliga, whose motto was to industrialize or perish. Certainly, since Mr. Baliga grew up and was in college, Mr. Vishweshwaraya's vision must have had an influence on his own vision for electronics for Bangalore. A book by William Simon and Vinay Rai titled Think India talks about the rise of world's next superpower and what it means for every American. It talks about Bangalore, India's Silicon Valley. Rasmus Lema and R.K. Heisberg talk about a search for collective efficiency in the software cluster in Bangalore. The book is titled The Virtual Extension, and he talks about Electronic City, Keonics, and other technological parks in Bangalore. A book titled Making Cities Global, The Transnational Turn in Urban History, in a book edited by A.K. Sandoval and Straussisi and Nancy Quack, talk about the role of Keonics in establishing Electronic City in 1978. The book is the chapter is authored by Margaret O'Mara. In a book or a white paper, a working paper by Dinsha Mistry from Stanford Law School, talks about public-private partnership from produce and protect to promoting private industry, the Indian state's role in creating a domestic software industry. So it's a public-private partnership. Governments do contribute to the success of entrepreneurs. Before Mr. R.K. Baliga died, Bangalore was already known as the Electronic City or the Silicon Valley of India. It's only in the early 1990s, according to this white paper, companies like Tata Consulting Services, Infosys, Hindustan Computers and Wipro were an emerging class of heavyweights in the early 90s. Other contemporary software firms, including Mphasis, Mindtree, Larsen and Larsen & Toubro's Infotech, were just emerging at that time. Another book by Mr. Indranil Ghosh, titled Powering Prosperity, A Citizen's Guide to Shaping the 21st Century, says, it all started in the 1970s when a man called R.K. Baliga, he had studied at the Indian Institute of Science, one of India's most prestigious universities, before working in the US for General Electric as a test engineer. His experience in the US had a profound impact on him. He dreamed of making native Bangalore into the Silicon Valley of India, an ambition that was met with derision in India and US alike. Baliga was not deterred by naysayers, and he goes on to say it's hard to exaggerate how big an achievement that is to get 332 acres was for Baliga, and one that owed a lot of foresight to the chief minister. Mr. Baliga was fortunate that Karnataka's chief bureaucrat, Mr. G.V.K. Rao, supported him in this. Another book on this topic is titled Network City, Planning the Information Society in Bangalore by James Heitzman, for those who are interested in developing similar electronic city in India or anywhere else in the world. Another book is titled Building Bangalore, Architecture and Urban Transformation in India's Silicon Valley. This is from an architectural perspective, and it's edited by John C. Stallmeyer. Other books on this topic include one by Mr. R.C. Mascarenhas from Australia, and he tries to change the name to India's Silicon Plateau because Karnataka is on a plateau, the Deccan Plateau. The subtitled Development of Information and Communication Technology in Bangalore. A book by Naushad Forbes and David Wield talks about technology from followers to leaders, managing technology and innovation in newly industrializing countries. The electronic city is also profiled in the book Pastoral Capitalism, A History of Suburban Corporate Landscapes by Louise Mozingo. This book is published by MIT Press, Massachusetts Institute of Technology Press. It talks about the role of Keonics in developing the electronic city. The most famous book about Bangalore is Thomas Friedman, The World is Flat, A Brief History of the 21st Century. And another important book is by Professor Tarun Khanna from Harvard Business School called Billions of Entrepreneurs, How China and India are Reshaping their futures and yours. In fact, in a high school book for 8th graders titled Discover Geography, Jaya Bal Gopal, the author talks about Bangalore has been declared as a hub for IT industry. Now, there are about 250 software technology firms and 1.6 million people work there. And it talks about the role of Keonics in developing the electronic city in Bangalore. Mr. R.K. Baliga's second son, Mr. Narendra Baliga, way back in the 70s, follows his father's footsteps, and he represents India in a 32-member contingent to participate in the International Children's Festival for 29 days in Arctic near Crimea, which was then Russia, now Ukraine, and he's profiled. He's profiled because he was the pride of St. Joseph's Boys High School. Yes, it's the same school which provided tech entrepreneurs. It talks about Narendra Baliga going to Russia, and talks about him as being a great collector of stamps and badges, and also as a batik artist. Narendra Baliga and his wife Anuradha Baliga and their children live in Bangalore. He's an asset manager. Mr. R.K. Baliga's daughter, Latika Pai, is a country head of Microsoft for venture capital and private equity. She is also, like her dad, promoting a highway to 100 unicorns for Microsoft for India. She's a serial entrepreneur, and like her dad, she is always trying to help society and give back. She also has a non-profit to promote female founders called Sonder Connect. Her husband, Amambal Siddharth Pai, is a correspondent for the Mint magazine. He's a successful technology executive and now a venture capitalist. He recently wrote a book on his articles from the Mint titled Tech Proof Me, which is published by Penguin Books. It's subtitled The Art of Mastering Ever-Changing Technology. Interestingly, Amambal Siddharth Pai's great-grandfather started Canara Bank, which we talked about earlier in this lecture. An article in December 2022 in the Swarajya magazine said Karnataka is the undisputed leader of India's information technology industry. The combined software exports in the state for 2021 to 2022 is over $53 billion or 3.95 lakh crores of rupees. And this is according to the data made available by the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology. McKinsey CEO Bob Sternfels goes on to say that it's going to be India's century. He says, I actually think it's India's century when we look at some of the raw ingredients here. India is the future talent factory for the world. By 2047, India will have 20% of the world's working population. And given that India has already undergone digitization, India is going to take off as a rocket. The foundation set by R.K. Baliga and the template he has set up for the electronic city in Bangalore, including 20 other cities which he has envisioned, maybe the MLAs of those cities need to hustle if they want their cities to contribute to the India of the next century. As you'll see in this photograph, he always searched for excellence. There's a book on his desk titled In Search of Excellence by Tom Peters. And it is so important that CEOs, visionaries are also learners and educators. Mr. R.K. Baliga is an outlier. His vision, one could argue, is still work in progress. And maybe, like Mokshagunda Vishweshwarya, someday he may be awarded a posthumous Bharat Ratna, who knows. Most importantly, he was a giver. He did not enrich himself. He was not a billionaire. But he spent all his life trying to promote the electronic city and the electronic industry in Karnataka. And according to Adam Grant, givers succeed because they help others. Once again, these are the 20 townships he had selected for Keonics, and hopefully the representatives, the MLAs, will try to hustle for their cities and expand the technology footprint in Karnataka. One such MLA is Harikrishna Bantwal. Yes, Mr. Bantwal is from the Bantwal where Mr. R.K. Baliga's father grew up, in the village of Bantwal. And in December 2020, he promoted the concept of setting an electronic city in Bangalore or Bengaluru, where Mr. Baliga grew up, and wanted to name it as the R.K. Baliga Electronic City. And interestingly, Mr. Bantwal is the CEO of Keonics and also the local MLA, that is the member of the Legislative Assembly, and is well positioned to deliver on this vision. So this is in a nutshell how a government bureaucrat changed the world. He didn't profit, he didn't become a billionaire. Any government servant can change the world. Any individual can change the world. And you all can do it too.